The bell above the small-town gun shop rang softly as an old man stepped in from the cold Montana wind, his worn coat carrying years no one in that room could understand. Walter Hayes walked to the counter and quietly asked for something simple to protect his home. One of the young employees smirked. "Sir, maybe you should stick to something you can actually handle." They pushed a small pistol toward him like it was charity, not respect. Walter lifted it, his hands steady, too steady, then glanced toward the rifles on the wall. "Could I see that one?" Laughter broke out. "That's not for you, old man." But Walter didn't react. He didn't argue. He simply stood there, calm, watching. And then the door opened again. A U.S. Marine stepped inside with his German Shepherd canine, and the dog stopped cold, eyes locked on the old man, as if it recognized something no one else could. Stay with this story until the end, because what happens next will change the way everyone in that room sees him forever. A pale winter wind drifted through the quiet streets of Billings, Montana, carrying the faint smell of snow and cold metal beneath a dim gray sky. Walter Hayes stepped through the narrow door of the roadside gun shop with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who understood both time and consequence. At 77, Walter was not physically imposing. He stood just under 6 feet, his frame lean almost to the point of fragility, as though years had carefully stripped away everything unnecessary, leaving only bone, sinew, and something harder to define. His hair was thin and completely silver, combed back neatly despite the wind outside, and his skin carried the deep lines of a life that had not been easy, but had been endured with quiet acceptance. There was a faint scar that disappeared into the collar of his shirt near the left side of his neck. Old, pale, and easy to miss unless someone knew where to look. His eyes, however, were what unsettled people who paid attention. They were a clear, steady gray, not dull with age, but sharpened by memory, like someone who had learned long ago that panic wasted time. Walter wore a worn brown jacket that had faded unevenly over the years, a simple flannel shirt underneath, and dark trousers that hung loosely over boots that had seen more years than most of the people in the room. The bell above the door gave a soft chime as it closed behind him, but the sound barely drew attention. Behind the counter stood 2 young men who looked like they had never known a day that truly tested them. The taller one, Tyler Briggs, was in his mid-20s, broad-shouldered in the careless way of someone who worked out more for appearance than necessity. His blonde hair was styled with too much precision, and his clean-shaven face carried a permanent half-smirk that suggested he found most things mildly amusing. Tyler leaned casually against the glass display case, spinning a pen between his fingers as if the day bored him. Beside him stood Mason Cole, a few years younger, thinner, with sharp cheekbones and restless eyes that moved too quickly, always searching for something to entertain him. Mason's dark hair was slightly unkempt, and there was a nervous energy about him, the kind that often hid behind laughter. Neither of them looked up immediately. Walter paused just inside the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim lighting. The shop smelled faintly of oil, old wood, and something metallic that lingered in the air. Rows of rifles lined the back wall, their silhouettes resting in quiet order beneath soft overhead lights. Glass cases displayed handguns, neatly arranged, polished, and waiting. It was a place built on control and precision, though the attitude behind the counter suggested otherwise. Walter walked forward at an even pace, his boots making soft, steady sounds against the wooden floor. There was no hesitation in his movement, no uncertainty. He approached the counter and rested one hand lightly against its edge, his fingers relaxed, not gripping, not tense. "I'm looking for something for home defense," Walter said, his voice low and even, carrying neither urgency nor doubt. It was the kind of voice that did not ask for permission to be heard. Tyler finally glanced up, his eyes quickly scanning Walter from head to toe. The assessment was immediate and shallow. Old, harmless, not worth the effort. "Home defense?" Tyler repeated, stretching the words slightly as if testing how seriously he should take them. Mason looked over as well, and the moment his eyes landed on Walter, a small grin crept across his face. Tyler pushed himself off the counter and reached beneath the glass case without much interest. "We've got something simple," he said, pulling out a compact pistol and placing it on the counter with a light tap. The gesture wasn't rude, but it lacked respect. "Lightweight, easy to handle." The implication hung quietly in the air. Walter looked down at the pistol without reacting to the tone. He picked it up carefully, his fingers moving with a level of control that did not match the assumptions being made about him. He checked the weight, adjusted his grip slightly, and with a smooth, practiced motion, he examined the slide and chamber. Not quickly, not slowly, but efficiently. There was no hesitation in his hands, no uncertainty. Mason noticed first. His grin faded just slightly, though he didn't understand why. Walter set the pistol back down exactly where it had been, aligned neatly as if placement mattered. His eyes lifted, drifting past the two young men and toward the wall behind them. The rifles rested there in quiet rows, dark and steady. He studied them for a moment longer than expected. "Could I take a look at that one?" Walter asked, nodding subtly toward a black rifle mounted under the light. The reaction was immediate. Tyler let out a short laugh, shaking his head as if he had just heard something ridiculous. Mason followed with a quick snort, leaning forward slightly. "That's not really something you need," Tyler said, his tone shifting from bored to amused. "That's a bit much." "Yeah," Mason added, folding his arms. "You might want to stick with something simpler, safer." There was a pause, brief but noticeable. Walter didn't respond. He didn't defend himself, didn't question them, didn't show irritation. He simply looked at the rifle again for a second, then returned his gaze to the counter. His face remained unchanged, calm in a way that wasn't passive but controlled. It was the kind of calm that came from experience, not personality. Tyler exchanged a quick glance with Mason, both of them expecting some kind of reaction, confusion, embarrassment, maybe even frustration. When none came, the moment lost its humor faster than they expected. Walter rested his hands lightly against the counter, his posture straight, balanced. His breathing remained steady. Inside, however, there was a quiet awareness that never left him. The same awareness that had followed him through years most people would never understand. He had learned long ago that people often saw what they expected to see. Age, weakness, irrelevance. It had stopped bothering him a long time ago. Still, there was something about the way they laughed that echoed faintly against older memories. Voices in different places, under different circumstances, where judgment had carried consequences far heavier than embarrassment. Walter pushed the thought aside without effort. The past was not something he revisited lightly. The shop returned to its low hum. Tyler leaned back again, tapping the pen against the glass, while Mason muttered something under his breath, the amusement not entirely gone, but less certain now. Walter remained where he was, patient, unmoving, his eyes drifting once more toward the rifle rack, as if time itself did not concern him. And for a moment, just a brief moment. The air in the room felt slightly off, though no one could explain why. The bell above the door rang again, softer this time, as a gust of cold air slipped into the shop and followed the man who stepped inside like an invisible shadow. Staff Sergeant Lucas Reed entered with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent most of his life in places where hesitation got people killed. At 44, Lucas carried the kind of presence that didn't need volume to command attention. He stood a solid 6'2", broad-shouldered and built with dense, functional strength rather than vanity. His face was defined by a sharp jawline and a faint scar that cut diagonally across his left eyebrow, a thin, pale line that spoke of a moment he never bothered explaining to anyone who hadn't earned the right to ask. His dark brown hair was trimmed short in a standard Marine cut, touched lightly with gray at the temples, and his steel blue eyes moved with calm precision, scanning the room the way someone does when they've learned that every space has variables. He wore an olive-green Marine Corps winter field jacket over a long-sleeved digital camouflage shirt, sleeves neatly rolled, matching camo pants, and tan, high-ankle combat boots that made almost no sound on the wooden floor despite their weight. Beside him moved Valor, a 6-year-old German Shepherd canine with rich, amber-toned fur and a strong black saddle marking across his back. Valor was large, powerful, and perfectly conditioned, his muscles visible beneath his thick coat with every controlled step. His ears stood upright, alert but not tense, and his amber-brown eyes held a level of focus that went far beyond instinct. This was not a pet. This was a trained partner, a working dog whose life had been shaped by discipline, repetition, and the unspoken language between handler and canine. Valor wore a fitted tactical harness, simple and functional, with no unnecessary weight, every piece of gear chosen for purpose. The moment they stepped inside, something shifted. Valor stopped. Not abruptly, not in alarm, but with intention. His body aligned, head lifting slightly, ears forward. His gaze locked across the room, on Walter. It wasn't aggression. There was no growl, no tightening of the jaw, no raised hackles. Instead, it was something far more specific. Recognition without familiarity. The kind of response a trained canine gives when reading something deeply embedded in human behavior. Control, balance, awareness. Lucas felt it instantly through the leash. He didn't look at Valor first. He looked at what Valor was looking at. Walter Hayes still stood at the counter, exactly where he had been moments before, his posture unchanged, hands resting lightly against the wood. From the outside, nothing about him appeared different. Still old, still quiet, still unremarkable to anyone who chose to see only the surface. But Lucas didn't look at surfaces. His eyes moved quickly, taking in details the way he had been trained to do without thinking. The way Walter stood, not leaning, not shifting weight unnecessarily. The way his shoulders stayed level, relaxed but ready. The angle of his head as he observed the room, not wandering, not distracted, but controlled, measured. Lucas slowed his steps without realizing it. Valor remained still, eyes fixed. Behind the counter, Tyler glanced up again, his expression briefly annoyed at the interruption before settling into his usual half-smirk. "Afternoon," he said casually, though his attention drifted more toward Lucas's uniform than anything else. Mason followed his gaze, his curiosity piqued now, not by Walter, but by the presence of a Marine and a canine inside the shop. "Nice dog," Mason muttered, though his tone carried more curiosity than respect. Valor didn't acknowledge him. Walter, however, noticed. Not the comment, the silence behind it. For the first time since Lucas entered, Walter's eyes shifted slightly, not turning his head fully, just enough to catch the movement in his peripheral vision. He didn't look directly at Lucas. Not yet. But there was a faint awareness now, something subtle and controlled. Inside, a quiet calculation began. Walter had spent years learning how to read rooms before rooms realized they were being read. And now, without effort, he registered the change. The shift in energy. The absence of careless movement from the new arrival. The presence of something disciplined. He had felt it before. Different time, different place, same feeling. Lucas took another step forward, slower now, his attention narrowing. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. But his gaze stayed on Walter longer than it should have for a stranger. Something about him didn't fit. Not the age, not the clothes. The stillness. It wasn't passive, it was controlled. Valor adjusted his stance slightly and then, almost imperceptibly, lowered himself into a seated position. Not because Lucas told him to, because he chose to. The movement was smooth, deliberate. A posture of readiness, not submission, but also not challenge. It was the kind of position Valor took around individuals who didn't need to prove control to have it. Lucas noticed that too. And now his focus sharpened. Behind the counter, Tyler leaned closer to Mason, lowering his voice just enough. "What's with the dog?" he whispered, though the humor in his tone was thinner now. Mason shrugged, but his eyes flicked back toward Walter briefly, something uncertain beginning to form in his expression. He didn't understand why. Neither of them did. Walter finally moved, just slightly. His fingers lifted from the counter, then rested again. A small adjustment, but enough for Lucas to see the control in the motion. No tremor, no hesitation. Not the hands of someone fragile. Walter's gaze shifted again, this time fully. His eyes met Lucas's. For a moment, nothing else existed in the room. No sound, no movement, just recognition, or the beginning of it. Lucas felt it like a memory trying to surface just out of reach. Something familiar, but not yet clear. His mind moved quickly, scanning through years of faces, places, moments blurred together by time and distance. Walter held the gaze calmly. He didn't react, didn't question, didn't acknowledge anything beyond the moment itself. But inside, something quiet stirred. Not surprise, not fear. Something closer to curiosity, and a faint, distant echo of something he hadn't expected to feel again. Valor remained seated between them, his attention unwavering, as if standing guard over a truth no one else in the room had recognized yet. And behind the counter, for reasons they couldn't explain, Tyler and Mason stopped laughing. The silence stretched just long enough to make everyone in the room aware of it. Lucas Reed took one more step forward, slow and deliberate, his boots landing with controlled weight against the wooden floor. His eyes never left Walter Hayes. There was something in that face, aged, worn, and quiet, that refused to remain unfamiliar. It was like looking at a photograph left too long in the sun. The details faded but not gone, waiting for the right angle of light to return. "Sir? Is that you?" Lucas said at last, his voice low, almost careful, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever fragile recognition was forming between them. The words settled heavily into the room. Tyler stopped spinning his pen. Mason straightened without realizing it. Walter turned. Not abruptly, not startled, but with a controlled motion that carried no wasted movement. His gray eyes met Lucas's fully now, studying him with the same calm attention he had given everything else in the shop. For a moment, Walter said nothing. He simply looked, taking in the lines of Lucas's face, the scar along his eyebrow, the posture that had not softened despite the years. Inside Walter's mind, something shifted. Not a memory yet, but close. Lucas stood straighter. It wasn't a conscious decision. His spine aligned, shoulders squared, chin lifting just slightly, not out of pride, but out of instinct. The kind of instinct drilled into him through years of service, reinforced by moments when hierarchy wasn't about rank on paper, but about who had earned something far more permanent. Valor moved then. The German shepherd rose from his seated position for a fraction of a second before repositioning himself directly beside Walter, lowering back down into a precise sit. His posture was composed, balanced, alert, but unmistakably respectful. His head remained high, ears forward, gaze steady, but his body language had shifted into something quieter, more deliberate. It was not submission in the usual sense. It was recognition of presence, of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Tyler blinked. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier arrogance. Mason didn't laugh this time. He watched. For the first time since Walter had entered the store, Mason's attention wasn't filtered through amusement or dismissal. It was cautious now, uncertain. Something about the interaction in front of him didn't make sense, and that lack of understanding unsettled him more than anything else. Walter's gaze remained on Lucas. Up close, the differences in time between them became clearer. Lucas was still in his physical prime, strong, sharp, grounded in the present. Walter, by contrast, carried the weight of years in every line of his face, every subtle stiffness in the way he held himself. But beneath that, there was something else. Something unchanged. "You've got the look," Walter said finally, his voice even, measured, as though he were confirming a detail rather than responding to a question. His tone carried no surprise, only quiet acknowledgement. "Marine." Lucas gave a small nod. "Yes, sir." The word came out before he could stop it. Tyler and Mason exchanged a quick glance. "Sir?" The title didn't fit the man they thought they were looking at. Walter's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus. He took a step closer now, closing the distance between them by just enough to study Lucas more carefully. His movements remained steady, balanced, every step placed with intention. Up close, Lucas could see more. The scar near Walter's neck wasn't random. It had direction, depth, not an accident, not something recent. And his hands, still steady, still controlled. "You served long enough to keep that posture," Walter said quietly, almost to himself. His gaze flicked briefly to Valor, then back to Lucas. "And long enough to know better than to assume things." The words weren't sharp, but they landed. Tyler felt his throat tighten slightly, though he couldn't explain why. Lucas exhaled slowly, something in his chest loosening as the recognition finally clicked into place. Not fully, not with a name yet, but enough to confirm what his instincts had been telling him since the moment he walked in. "I've seen that stance before," Lucas said, his voice lower now, more certain. "Not here, not stateside." Walter held his gaze. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, too fast for anyone else in the room to catch. Memory. Real memory. For a second, the shop disappeared, replaced by heat, dust, noise that never really stopped. The kind of environment where standing still meant something very different than it did here. Walter blinked once. The moment passed. He stepped back slightly, creating space again, returning the conversation to something quieter, less exposed. "You've seen a lot of things," Walter said, his tone neutral again. "That's enough." Lucas didn't respond immediately. He studied Walter's face again, searching now not just for recognition, but for confirmation. There was a story there, a long one. And for the first time in years, Lucas found himself unsure how to approach it. Behind them, a new voice broke the silence. An older man near the far display case shifted his weight and cleared his throat softly. His name was Harold Bennett, a retired mechanic in his late 60s with a thick gray beard and rough, oil-stained hands that never quite lost their texture no matter how many times he washed them. Harold had spent most of his life fixing things, engines, tools, anything broken, and that habit had shaped the way he saw the world. He didn't rush to conclusions. He observed first. And right now, he was observing something that didn't add up. "You two know each other?" Harold asked, his voice calm but curious, his eyes moving between Walter and Lucas. Neither answered immediately. Walter didn't look at him. Lucas barely acknowledged him. The question lingered in the air, unanswered but not ignored. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence completely gone now. "Look, man," he said, trying to regain some control of the situation, though his voice lacked conviction. "We're just trying to help him pick something he can actually use." Walter didn't turn, but Lucas did, slowly. The change in his expression wasn't loud. There was no anger, no raised voice, but the calm intensity in his eyes made Tyler stop mid-sentence. Valor remained still, watching. Lucas looked back at Walter again, then at the rifle on the wall that had started all of this, then back at Tyler. "He asked to see that rifle," Lucas said quietly. It wasn't a question. And for the first time since the conversation began, no one in the room felt like laughing. Walter remained silent, but his eyes moved, just slightly, toward Lucas. And in that brief glance, there was something new. Not just recognition anymore. Something closer to acknowledgement. The kind that only comes after both people realize they're no longer strangers. The air inside the shop felt heavier now, as if something unseen had settled over the room and pressed down on every word that followed. Lucas Reed shifted his weight slightly and turned toward the counter, placing himself just enough between Walter and the two young employees to redirect the focus. His posture remained controlled, shoulders squared, chin level. But there was a quiet edge to him now, something colder, more deliberate. His eyes moved from Tyler to Mason, holding them in place without raising his voice. "You think he doesn't know what he's doing?" Lucas said, his tone calm but firm, each word placed carefully, like something measured rather than spoken in anger. "You think you're helping him?" Tyler opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Lucas didn't give him time. "That man," he continued, glancing briefly back at Walter before returning his gaze forward, "is the reason I'm standing here breathing." The sentence didn't hit like a shout. It hit like weight. Mason's expression faltered first. His shoulders dropped slightly, his earlier smirk completely gone, replaced by something closer to uncertainty. Tyler's jaw tightened, his confidence eroding in real time, though he tried to hold on to it. Walter didn't interrupt. He stood where he had been, hands resting lightly against the counter, eyes steady, almost distant. There was no pride in his posture, no expectation of recognition. If anything, there was a faint reluctance in the way he listened, like a man who had spent years learning to live without the past being spoken out loud. Lucas exhaled slowly, the memory already pulling him back before he could stop it. "It was 8 years ago," he said, his voice lowering, not for effect, but because that's how the memory existed in his mind. Quiet, focused, stripped of anything unnecessary. "Northern Ridge outside Alcara. We were moving through a valley we were told was clear." He paused. Harold Bennett leaned slightly closer against the display case, arms folded, his weathered face drawn into concentration. He had spent a lifetime around machines, but even he understood when something more serious than mechanics was unfolding. "It wasn't clear," Lucas continued. "The words were simple, but they carried something underneath them. We walked straight into an ambush." Tyler swallowed. Mason didn't move. Walter's eyes shifted slightly, not toward Lucas, but downward, as if the memory had already found him before the words did. Lucas's gaze stayed fixed ahead. "You don't hear it at first," he said quietly. "Not the way people think. It's not loud right away. It's wrong. The air changes, and then everything hits at once." His hand lifted slightly, unconsciously brushing the edge of his shoulder, just below the collar of his jacket. "That's where I took it," he said. Tyler's eyes followed the motion without meaning to. "A round came through clean. Knocked me down before I even knew where it came from. I couldn't feel my arm. Couldn't get up. And by the time I realized what had happened..." Lucas paused, his jaw tightening briefly, the memory sharpening. "Half my unit was already pinned." The room remained completely silent. Even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed distant now. Lucas turned his head slightly, not fully toward Walter, but enough to acknowledge him. "No one could reach me," he said. "Not without crossing open ground. And out there, that's not something you survive." Mason's breathing slowed. Tyler looked at the floor. Lucas let the silence stretch for a moment, not to build tension, but because that's how the memory existed. Broken into pieces, separated by moments that mattered too much to rush. And then he moved. The words shifted something. Walter didn't react, but his fingers tightened, just slightly, against the edge of the counter. Lucas's voice remained steady. He didn't wait. Didn't hesitate. He came straight through it. Tyler looked up again, confusion mixing with something else now, something closer to disbelief. Lucas continued, his eyes distant now, seeing something none of them could. He had a rifle in one hand, medical kit strapped across his back, and he moved like... Lucas shook his head once, the faintest hint of something almost like disbelief still lingering even after all these years. Like he'd already accepted the outcome and didn't care what it was. Walter's breathing remained even, but inside something old stirred. Not fear, not pride, just memory. Lucas leaned slightly forward, resting one hand against the glass case now, grounding himself in the present as he spoke. "He reached me in under 30 seconds, he said. 30 seconds across open fire. That's not luck. That's not chance." Harold's brow furrowed. He understood enough about risk to know what that meant. Lucas glanced back at Walter again. "And he didn't just drag me out," he added quietly. "He stabilized me first. Right there. Under fire. stopped the bleeding before I even realized how bad it was. Mason shook his head slightly, almost unconsciously. "That's not," he started, but the words didn't finish. Lucas didn't look at him. "He carried me out after that," Lucas said. One arm keeping pressure on the wound, the other still holding that rifle. Tyler's face had gone pale. Walter closed his eyes for just a fraction of a second, then opened them again. Lucas straightened. "He was the last one to leave that valley," he said. The statement landed harder than anything else. No explanation, no elaboration, just fact. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was understanding. Tyler looked at Walter again, really looked this time. Not at the jacket, not at the age, but at the man standing in front of him. And for the first time, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. Not weakness. Control. Mason took a slow step back, his earlier posture completely gone, replaced by something uncertain, almost respectful, without knowing why. Walter shifted slightly, his weight adjusting just enough to break the stillness. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. His voice carried no weight of importance, no expectation, just distance. Lucas nodded once. "Yes, sir," he said. Walter's gaze moved briefly toward the rifle on the wall, then back to the counter. "I'm not here for that," he added. Simple, final, and somehow heavier than everything Lucas had just said. No one in the room spoke, because for the first time, they understood exactly how wrong they had been. The silence that followed Lucas's words did not break quickly. It settled, deep and unmoving, like dust after something heavy had fallen, and no one yet dared to disturb it. Walter Hayes stood exactly where he had been, his posture unchanged, his presence neither expanded nor diminished by what had just been revealed. If anything, he seemed slightly removed from it, as though the story Lucas had told belonged to another version of himself, one that existed far away, separated by years and choices that could not be undone. His gray eyes drifted once more to the glass counter, then briefly to the rifle on the wall, before returning to the present moment with quiet clarity. Tyler Briggs shifted his weight awkwardly behind the counter, the earlier arrogance that had defined him now completely absent, replaced by a visible discomfort that came not from being corrected, but from realizing the depth of his mistake. Up close, Tyler's confidence had always been built on surface judgments. He was the kind of man who read people quickly and rarely questioned those first impressions, a habit shaped by years of being right just often enough to believe he always was. Now that habit had turned against him, and it showed in the way his jaw tightened and his hands no longer knew where to rest. Beside him, Mason Cole stood unusually still, his restless energy gone, his sharp eyes now slower, more deliberate, as if trying to relearn how to see the man in front of him without filtering him through assumption. Mason had always followed Tyler's lead, laughing when Tyler laughed, dismissing when Tyler dismissed. But this time, there was no one to follow, and that left him exposed to a realization he didn't quite know how to handle. Walter reached out and lightly adjusted the position of the pistol case on the counter, aligning it with the edge in a small, precise motion that carried more meaning than it appeared. Control, order, habit. Not for show, just because that was how he had always done things. Lucas Reed watched the movement closely, his expression steady but softened now, the sharp edge from earlier replaced by something quieter, more personal. He had seen men react differently to being recognized. Some leaned into it, some rejected it, Some tried to explain it. But Walter did none of those things. He simply returned to what he had come to do. That, more than anything else, confirmed what Lucas already knew about him. Valor remained seated at Walter's side, his body still, his attention calm, not fixed in tension, but in awareness, the way a trained canine remained present without needing instruction. The dog's amber-brown eyes occasionally shifted between Lucas and Walter, not uncertain, but balanced, as though recognizing a shared understanding between the two men that did not require sound. Tyler cleared his throat, the sound louder than intended in the quiet room. "Sir," he began, then stopped, the word unfamiliar in his mouth when directed towards someone he had mocked only minutes before. He tried again, slower this time. I'm sorry." The apology came out uneven, not polished, not practiced, but real in a way that mattered more than delivery. Mason nodded quickly beside him, his voice lower. "Yeah, we shouldn't have talked to you like that." Neither of them looked away this time. Walter glanced up, meeting their eyes briefly, and there was no anger there, no satisfaction either, only acknowledgement. He gave a small nod, nothing exaggerated, nothing performative. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You didn't know." The words landed differently than they expected. There was no edge to them, no lesson wrapped in judgment, just a simple truth that carried its own weight. For Tyler, that made the moment harder, not easier. Being forgiven without resistance forced him to sit with what he had done in a way that an argument never would have. Walter's hand rested lightly on the counter again. "I'm not here for anything complicated," he continued, his voice even. "Just something reliable, something safe." He paused, his gaze drifting briefly toward the door, as if the outside world was already calling him back. "That's all I need." Lucas nodded slightly, understanding more in those few words than anyone else in the room could. It wasn't just about a firearm. It was about control, about quiet, about keeping something protected without inviting anything else back into his life. Harold Bennett shifted his stance near the display case, his thick gray beard moving slightly as he exhaled through his nose, the faintest hint of a smile forming. Not amusement, but recognition. He had seen men like Walter before. Not in war, but in the aftermath of it. In the way they carried themselves when they chose not to talk about where they had been. Tyler reached for the pistol again, this time with care, placing it properly into its case before sliding it toward Walter with both hands. The gesture had changed. It wasn't casual anymore. It was deliberate, respectful. "This one's solid," Tyler said, his voice steadier now. "Simple, reliable, good for home defense." There was no condescension left in the words. Mason moved quietly beside him, opening a small lockbox and setting it next to the case without being asked, his movements measured, focused, as if trying to correct something that could not fully be undone. Walter opened the case and checked the weapon once more, his hands moving with the same calm precision as before. But now, every movement was watched differently. Where earlier it had been dismissed, now it was understood. He closed the case and gave a small nod. "This will do," he said. Lucas straightened fully then, his posture shifting into something unmistakable. It wasn't exaggerated, but it was clear. Respect, expressed in the language he knew best. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Walter noticed. Just briefly. And that was enough. Valor adjusted slightly, his posture mirroring the stillness, his presence quiet but unwavering. Tyler handed over the paperwork, and Walter signed with steady handwriting, the pen moving without hesitation across the page. When he finished, he set it down neatly, exactly aligned with the edge of the counter, just as he had done with everything else. Walter picked up the case, his grip firm but relaxed, and turned toward the door. He paused for a moment before stepping forward, not out of uncertainty, but as if choosing whether to leave something behind. Slowly, he looked back over his shoulder. His gaze moved across the room, over Tyler, over Mason, over Harold, and finally to Lucas. His expression remained calm, unchanged, but his voice carried just enough weight to hold the room again. "You never know what someone's been through," he said. There was no lecture in it, no demand, just a statement, offered and left behind. Then he opened the door. The bell rang softly as the cold air slipped in once more, and Walter Hayes stepped outside, disappearing into the pale afternoon light without another word. The door closed behind him, and the sound echoed slightly longer than it should have. No one spoke. Tyler stared at the counter, his reflection faint in the glass, his earlier self almost unrecognizable to him now. Mason leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, his eyes lingering on the door as if expecting it to open again, though he knew it wouldn't. Harold shook his head once, quietly. "Funny thing about people," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "The ones who've seen the most usually say the least." Lucas remained where he was for a moment longer, his gaze fixed on the door, then finally turned, giving one last look to the space Walter had occupied, before nodding once to himself. Valor stood smoothly at his side, ready to move, but calm, as if the moment had already settled into something understood. And in that small shop in Billings, Montana, something invisible had shifted, something none of them would forget, even long after the man they had misjudged had quietly walked away. Sometimes the greatest strength doesn't come from what people say, but from what they've survived in silence. God often places extraordinary stories inside ordinary people, reminding us that every life we pass by may carry a miracle we cannot see. In our everyday lives, we are given small chances to show kindness, to choose respect, to pause before we judge. These moments may seem simple, but they are where faith quietly lives, and where God works through us in ways we may never fully understand. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still matters. Leave a comment below about a time you witnessed strength in someone you didn't expect. And if you believe that everyone deserves to be seen with compassion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that bring light into the world. May God bless you, protect your path, and bring peace into your life and your home.